All right, well, welcome to Climate Change and its Effects on Winter Sports. This part of the presentation is by the Arizona Trail Gear Girls, Lucia Morales, Scarlett Morales, Xylene Norton, Leanne Taylor, and me, McKenna Moreno.
We will be introducing the webinar and providing a brief explanation of what climate change is, and then our other presenters will go into more detail about how climate change affects winter sports in the greater Flagstaff community. Please put any questions that you have for any of the presenters into the chat box. We will answer them at the end. If the question is for a specific presenter, please include their name. We hope you enjoy.
We want to start by acknowledging that Flagstaff is the homeland of Indigenous peoples who have lived and traveled here since time immemorial. The San Francisco Peaks, a main subject of this webinar, is sacred to at least 13 local Indigenous nations. We respect their communities, past, present, and future, and recognize them as the original peoples of this land. We are grateful for the opportunity to live in Flagstaff and to connect with, recreate on, and be stewards of this land.
Gear Girls is an all-girls program that does outdoor activities together. We mountain bike, fix trails, and learn outdoor skills. And in the winter, we do snow sports, including cross-country skiing and snowshoeing. I personally like making snow forts. After the Gear Girls presentation, we will hear presentations from the City of Flagstaff, Kachina Peaks Avalanche Center, and the Arizona Nordic Village.
Why are we having this webinar? We have not been able to experience winters the way they were a long time ago and know that if something is not done, future generations will have even less opportunities.
Many people can connect to winter sports, and a large part of the economy and our water supply depends on reliable snow and ice. We hope that by creating this webinar, we can help spur action on this cause and provide information about how to act on such an overwhelming issue, and moreover, why to act.
Climate change has also affected Gear Girls. In the winter season, Gear Girls is centered around snow sports, but unfortunately, we've had less and less snowpack over the years, so we haven't been able to cross-country ski or snowshoe as much. This changes what we're able to do and learn at Gear Girls. While we've found ways to adapt our activities in the winter, when there's no snow or less snow, we still hope for more opportunities to go on snow-based adventures. Thank you for listening to my Gear Girls story.
When humans emit greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide from factories, vehicles, and other things, the greenhouse gases go into the atmosphere. When the sun's light reflects off the Earth, the light can't escape Earth's atmosphere as quickly as it needs to, because the greenhouse gases catch the light and bounce it around, keeping it in Earth's atmosphere for way.
While the light is in the atmosphere, it heats up the world and the oceans. This heat creates droughts, hurricanes, and wildfires, which we will be going over in the next slide. In short, the sunlight gets caught in Earth's atmosphere by greenhouse gases, and the light creates global warming. In the picture on the slide, you can see how this happens. The light enters our atmosphere and causes surface heating. Some of the light escapes, but not enough to maintain a steady climate. Also, some of the carbon deposits into the oceans, causing ocean acidification.
Some of the impacts that climate change can lead to are wildfires, floods, hurricanes, dry climate, also known as droughts, less snow, mudslides, coldest temperatures getting warmer, and ocean acidification, as we mentioned in the last slide. The pie chart is showing the worldwide annual greenhouse gas emissions from 2005, which is basically what is causing climate change and all of the things listed on the left.
There are a lot of great organizations that help prevent climate change. Some of them are the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance, 365.org, the Environmental Defense Fund, Earth Justice, Union of Concerned Scientists, the Solutions Project, Citizens Climate Lobby, and the City of Flagstaff Sustainability Program. You can donate to or volunteer with these organizations, or you can ride your bike more often. Even the smallest acts help. Educate people. Not a lot of people know the science behind climate change. You can install solar panels, Solar United Neighbors is a solar co-op, or you can buy from local growers. Or you can get involved, help organizations, or volunteer at the public garden. We'd like to now turn the time over to our other presenters. First, we will hear from Lee Bryant from the City of Flagstaff. Then we will play a pre-recorded presentation from David Lovejoy from the Kachina Peaks Avalanche Center, and he will be able to answer questions at the end. Then we will hear from Theo Callan from the Arizona Nordic Village as our last presenter, and then we will open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Gear Girls. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and start my presentation. My name is Lee Bryant, and I am representing the City of Flagstaff Sustainability Program. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about climate change in Flagstaff and the impacts that those changes have on winter sports here. So, a little bit of our outline. We're going to talk about the leading causes of changes in Flagstaff. You girls already did a great job giving us the overview, and so we're going to narrow in on Flagstaff next. We'll talk about some local trends and some current and projected changes, and talk a little bit about the broad impacts of climate change on the natural environment here. And then we're going to focus in on winter sports, because that is the webinar subject. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities, the recreational impacts of climate change, some of the economic impacts, and a little bit on the solutions or possible solutions. So I want to briefly just start with, as you guys already mentioned, what causes climate change? It's greenhouse gas emissions. And so in Flagstaff, the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions come from two sources. Number one is powering buildings, and that includes the residential, commercial, and industrial buildings here in Flagstaff. It's about 45%. And our second biggest emitter is transportation at about 42%. And this is a little old, and so these percents might have changed, but generally speaking, powering our buildings and driving around our cars and buses and all that kind of stuff, those are what cause the major greenhouse gas emissions here in Flagstaff. And since you guys have already talked about how greenhouse gases relate to climate change, I don't have to, and we're just going to jump into what some of these greenhouse gas emissions and resulting climate change does in Flagstaff. And so the data I'm going to show you in the graphs come from the climate profile for the City of Flagstaff, which was conducted and put together in 2017, and it used historical data to project future conditions, and it is zeroed in on Nino County. So it's not just the Southwest broadly or Arizona, it is our county. And so the data are very much tailored to what's going to happen in Flagstaff. It's available online to download and view if you're interested. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the vulnerability assessment, which was conducted in 2012. And that looks a little bit at the social and environmental impacts of climate changes. So I'm going to show you a couple of graphs so you get a good picture. This graph right here shows annual average temperature over time in Flagstaff. And any blue bar is a temperature below the long-term average, which is the thick horizontal bar here. So anything blue below that means the year was on average colder than that long-term average. And all the orange bars represent years where the annual average was above that long-term average. And what we can see right here is an increase since about 1985 in increasingly warmer years on average. And so we know that temperature in Nino County is increasing. And it's driven largely by increasing low temperatures, which is a little different than in the valley. In Phoenix, their warm temperatures are getting much warmer and much hotter. But here in Flagstaff, we're not experiencing crazy days of 100 degrees. What we're experiencing are fewer nights below freezing. And there are two graphs to kind of show you that. Here we've got a graph showing average temperatures, where we've got average maximum temperatures across years, the total average, so just a different way to look at that graph we just saw, and the average minimums. And something that's interesting to see is right here since about, again, 1985, maybe a little later, 1995. You can see that those average minimum temperatures have been increasing pretty steadily compared to our average maximum temperatures. They're kind of all over the place and they have really stayed that way. But it's those minimum temperatures that are increasing. And we can see it again here on this graph. We're looking at days with below freezing or sub-freezing temperatures. And so any days, any bars that are orange are again have fewer days below freezing than the long-term average. And any bars that are blue mean there were days in that year below freezing that were above the long-term average. And we can see about the past decade or so, almost 2 decades now, we can just see that we're having more and more years that have below that long-term average of freezing, days below freezing. And so really what this all means is when we have fewer nights below freezing, it changes our precipitation patterns. And we end up getting more precipitation as rain instead of snow. And that's where we see a big impact on our winter sports. So by 2050, there are a couple of conditions we can expect in Flagstaff due to climate change. We can expect hotter temperatures, and with those, increased risk of illnesses from mosquitoes or other pests that can survive in warm temperatures. We also are going to experience less snowpack, and like I said, more of that precipitation falling as rainfall instead of snowfall. We can also see increased fire risks and increased drought conditions, which you guys kind of already talked about. And because of those drought conditions, we actually see more harm to our forest health because the trees are drought stressed, the soil moisture is lower, and so then the trees are more susceptible to pest infestation from like bark beetles. And then some more conditions are just more drought conditions because of those increased temperatures, which actually affects our aquifer recharge. When we have a lot of rain that hits the ground, only so much of it can be soaked up and the rest runs off. And when we have that runoff, we don't get as much soaking into the soil. And so that changes how our aquifer or our underground water resource recharges. And then we can also expect lower quality in our water reservoirs like Lake Mary, because as it gets warmer, that water evaporates. And so then all of the stuff floating in the water, there's more of it relative to the amount of water. And so it changes our water quality. But what we really want to focus on when it comes to winter sports are less snowpack and this change in our precipitation. So it's not that we necessarily get less precipitation, it just doesn't land the same. We get rain and not as much snow now. And so thinking about what's at risk, climate change impacts every aspect of our lives, from health to infrastructure to local ecosystems. Our water's impacted, land use and housing. But what we really want to focus on for this talk is tourism and economy. So when it comes to winter recreation, the vulnerability assessment that was conducted in 2012 rated how different aspects of our community are impacted by climate change. And winter tourism is a high vulnerability. It's very vulnerable. When we have less snowpack, less people can ski. And when we have more sporadic snow events, that also impacts how people recreate. If we have irregular or inconsistent snowfall year to year, it makes it hard to create stability for the different companies or businesses that rely on our winter snow play. And so specifically thinking about Arizona Snow Bowl or the Nordic Center, it kind of creates this lack of steady income or employment for those folks. Because as you guys can see, just from the past couple of winters, 2018-19 was pretty wet. We had snowpocalypse and everybody was stuck in their house for a couple of days. And then 2019-20 felt bone dry, hardly any snow. And then this year seems to be shaping up to this like constant kind of trickle of snow every week or so, but nothing really staying too long. And so all this inconsistency plays into the impact on winter recreation. And just as a reminder, we've got some little cloud images down there. All of this is being driven by the climate change impact of shifting our precipitation from less snowfall to more rainfall. And so I kind of already touched on it a little bit. If we step back and we think, okay, winter recreation, now the broader economics that are associated with that recreation, when we have these sporadic or inconsistent snowfalls and snowy seasons, then that alters our visitation. So people aren't coming up as much when there's not as much snow to visit and play in the snow. But also when we have a good snowfall, then all of a sudden there are tons of people coming up from the valley or surrounding areas to hang out. And so that changes our traffic patterns, that increases our greenhouse gas emissions from those visitations. It also alters the revenue for gear rental shops. And so if we have a really low snow year, places like Peace Surplus or SMR or REI that rent out gear, they see an impact on their revenue there. And then again, when we have a snow event, it's like everybody's packed in and they might run out of gear. It just kind of oscillates back and forth, and it's hard to get consistency. Again, economically, we see inconsistent employment for the winter tourism industry. And again, all of this visitation then impacts our restaurants and our hotels, both revenues and jobs for local folks that work maybe in restaurants or the hotels in town, when we have all this inconsistency with visitation. And solutions are really tricky. So I want to take us back to that greenhouse gas emissions graph. The overarching goal here is mitigation. So that's reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. That is the biggest solution to our problem. And so some of that looks like increasing the electrification of our buildings and our transportation. And that includes things like fuel switching, where we're taking appliances like furnaces and stoves and water heaters that run off of gas, and we're shifting that to run off of electricity, because electricity can come from nice renewable sunshine and wind, which is really good for the environment. And so switching to electrification allows us to move more towards renewable energy sources. And electrification of the transportation system looks like more electric buses or e-bikes or e-scooters, anything you can put E in front of and put a motor on. So really getting people less dependent on cars and gas and more dependent on electric, clean ways of transporting ourselves. Some other solutions are thinking of the adaptation side of things. And so that means, there already so much carbon dioxide in the air, and we can't really take out what's there right now. And so how do we adapt to these changes that we can't necessarily change? And that can look at using alternative ways to use snow play areas, which you girls already mentioned, finding ways to adapt during the winter and do other things, or maybe finding revenue sources for the Nordic Center or Snow Bowl that aren't based during the snow season. I know that Nordic Center, you can have your wedding there. And so that's a way they can stay in business and help buffer a low snow year, and so that their business has some income and consistency when the snow is inconsistent. And also maybe working on some free transportation to Snow Bowl or the Nordic Center up 180. There is a bus line that runs during the snow season that allows people to get there without driving, and that can reduce the traffic, reduces the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that travel. And so that's another really great option. And these are just a couple of solutions. There are many more out there, but these are the big kind of areas of mitigation and adaptation that we want to think about. And with that, hopefully that was brief enough to save time for questions and other presenters.
Hey folks, here we are today. We're going to be talking about climate change and how this may affect San Francisco peaks, and specifically winter recreation and safety on San Francisco peaks. So my background is I've been observing snow for about 50 years as a faculty member at Prescott College, as an outdoor recreationalist, as a founder of Kachina Peaks Avalanche Center. We've got some pretty good data on certain elements of climate change, and other things are kind of speculative, really based on observation. Okay, here's a chart that basically is some history of winter snowfall at 10,800 feet at the Snow Bowl. And you can see if you look at the center column where the pluses and minuses are, these are when it's above or below the historic average. And you can see kind of all over the map, the stuff in the right-hand column, you'll see the stronger years tend to correlate with what's called El Nino. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Okay, here's a chart of winter snowfall. And you can see some big years, those high columns, 460 inches, some low ones below 80 inches. At 80 inches, not much backcountry skiing going on. A little hard to decipher a pattern. It's kind of all over the map. It seems like the latter half is maybe a little more stable, but at a little lower level. Not sure. We'll look at some analysis of that in the next slide. Here we have a historic average snowfall of 260 inches. If we look at all of the, if we break this 30-year period by decades, we'll find that there's a pattern that emerges. The first decade, 1991 to 2000, we see 258 inches, pretty close to that historical average. But then the next decade, from 2001 to 2010, we have a dramatic drop to 202 inches average, and then a further drop between 2011 and 2020, where the average is only 199 inches. If we take that entire 30-year average, it comes out to about 204 inches, so still dramatically reduced from the historic average. Okay, some of my own observations have been related to warming temperatures. We don't have good data from up on the mountain. Flagstaff is showing a warming trend, the Flagstaff airport, but one of the things I've noticed is that the snow line seems to be going up. A lot of times it snows above 7,500 feet in these storms, where it probably used to have an average around 5,500 feet. So that's showing a warming trend. Also, we've noticed more events where we've had high elevation rain. That's of concern to avalanche forecasters, because rain on the snow is one of the things that causes avalanching or causes some weak layer development. We've also noticed longer dry spells between storms in many winters, and we've certainly seen that this year, where February was pretty dry and the early season was very dry. But we also get some extreme events. We get some big storms like we had this year. We had 77 inches at that elevation, at high elevation, in about a 3.5 day period of time, a sequence of 2 storms that came through, but that's more than half of our snowfall so far this winter. Lots of variability has been one of the key factors. Variability, both seasonally, meaning dry seasons and some wet seasons, and variability within a single season. Anyway, winds are a little bit hard to tell. Winds are always high on San Francisco peaks, being a big mountain in the middle of a flat Colorado plateau, but my guess is winds are also increasing. And these observations are consistent with the findings of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Climate Prediction Center and the UN report that came out on global climate change and divided the globe into different regions and predicted what would happen. And the trends are warming, this is for the Southwest, warming, drying, higher variability. Higher variability meaning more extreme events, more big snowstorms, but also more droughts between snowstorms. Okay, if we have one thing that could conceivably help us, it would be a phenomenon known as El Nino. In the southern Pacific Ocean, we find that there's some fluctuations in the sea surface temperature off the coast of Ecuador and extending over towards Indonesia. And depending on where the warm water is and how warm it is compared to the average, these things can affect the climate in North America. As I said before, when we have an El Nino, we tend to have wetter and warmer weather. So means high snow lines, but it also means lots of snow way up high. Are El Nino events becoming more frequent during the climate change that we're experiencing. That's still an open debate. It seems like they are a little bit, but it's kind of a, chicken and egg thing. Are the El Ninos being created by the warming climate, or is the warming climate being created by the El Ninos? There's some debates there. In the past 30 years, we've had about 10 of these events, so pretty good wet years. And of the 10 events in the Southwest, we've found that over the last 30 years, 90% of them have created pretty good years that are over that 204 new average that I established with the earlier chart, and 50% even exceeding the 260 historical snowfall. Here's a chart that sort of shows how this works. The peaks are El Ninos and the dips are La Ninas, which is the opposite condition. La Nina winters usually give us cooler, drier, lower than average precipitation. Sort of here's how the thing works. It basically, the orange streak there is sort of a pattern of warmer, wetter weather. Our northern storms that create snow for our winters that are born up in near Alaska come down, and they kind of draw in some moist, wet air and tend to create more productive storms in the Southwest. So the grim realities, well, you're going to have to go higher on San Francisco peaks or higher elsewhere, I guess, to find snow in the future, except on those funny anomalous years. But generally, the snow line will be higher. Height usually works better than north because climate scientists believe that the northern latitudes are actually warming at a greater rate than the mid latitudes. But be prepared for some disappointing winters where backcountry skiing may not even be possible. Even San Francisco peaks may not be able to make snow on their lower slopes in the future, is my prediction. But we're revel in the good ones. We will have some good years, and they may be fewer and further between, but we still will probably have some good years. That's also when overall we'll probably have fewer avalanches, but the ones that we have may be bigger and on those big years. And yeah, don't get rid of your mountain bike because the mountain bike season will be extended. What can you do as a person to help this? Well, there's not a lot you can do because really the conditions that we're experiencing now are really have been created by our parents. We've known about some of these things for a long time. We haven't done very much about it. So really we need to act, but the actions that we take will really be benefiting our children and our grandchildren. I'm afraid it's going to get worse before it gets better. We need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels or eliminate it altogether. That's where the carbon dioxide comes from that's creating most of this problem. Although there are some other gases that we're producing that are having a negative effect. We need to reduce other carbon dioxide producing things that are part of modern life. Things like producing concrete, turning limestone into cement creates a lot of carbon dioxide, and so that's a problem. We need to plant trees or encourage vegetation. Vegetation in its photosynthetic process absorbs CO2, and that can pull some of the CO2 out of the atmosphere. We need to consider population numbers because the more people, the more CO2 we create. And so we need to think about, is there some kind of carrying capacity as a human species that we have? We should welcome immigration. So rather than having big families, we need to welcome others into our area because climate change will create inhospitable conditions for others around the world. And boy, we created most of it as a Western country that uses a lot of resources. So we have some responsibility to those people as well. And waste nothing is really the overall message. Okay, thank you for your attention, and I will try to answer some of your questions in a different forum. Thanks.
All right. Hey everyone, I'm Theo Callan, and I'm the operations manager at the Arizona Nordic Village. And I'm just here to talk about our own observations and how climate change affects our day-to-day, as well as the projected future for winter activities at the village. The Nordic Village is an off-grid multi-purpose facility, which offers backcountry lodging year-round in yurts and cabins. wedding and event space in the spring and summer, and is Arizona's only designated cross-country ski and snowshoe facility. Climate change has affected the Nordic Village's typical activities greatly across all seasons, and all of these take a toll on our ability to continue to provide winter activities to Flagstaff and the surrounding areas. In previous years, we have been able to remain open for cross-country skiing and snowshoeing from at least November through February and even into March or early April. In recent years, as the other presenters have outlined very well, the inconsistent snow and warmer temperatures in these months makes this difficult or even impossible. For example, we were not able to open for winter activities in our 20 to 21 season until December, and we have not been able to remain open for more than 2 weekends in a row thus far. Our higher elevation trails do hold on to snow very well, despite the warm conditions, although the snow on the lower trails melts and makes these other trails inaccessible. This is a huge financial hit for us, as we take in the majority of our income during this time. This affects our overall ability as a company to expand and improve our facility, as well as our community, considering we are a very popular activity for many people in the surrounding area, as well as being an excellent way for more people to get out and enjoy the incredible environment we have here in Flagstaff. The aspen trees around our property we use for our own firewood supply in the winter, and these trees are now more likely to fall in high winds as we experience less rain and snowfall. This creates hazards for our skiers and snowshoers, guests and staff alike, as well as depleting the amount of viable trees we can use for our own firewood, as they fall and rot from the inside faster than we are able to cut them into usable material. Harvesting firewood sustainably is a key part of our business plan as an off-grid facility, and the recent conditions have made this much more difficult. The aspen trees are also a huge attraction for people looking to enjoy winter sports at the village, and the rate at which they are falling and dying is fairly alarming. The Forest Service and outside entities are conducting research into why exactly this rapid decline in aspen trees is occurring, although this does not change how their rapid death affects our business currently. This lack of moisture also creates other issues for us the rest of the year, such as restrictions placed on outdoor fires, as well as the common close proximity of larger forest fires to our business. Even when we are able to allow outdoor fires, the dry forest floor year-round has made it more likely for our guests staying in our lodging and enjoying winter activities to accidentally start small blazes with discarded coals or unattended fires. As a result of many of these issues, our staff spends more time than ever on communicating with guests, searching for viable firewood, and switching between being available for winter activities and just waiting for the next snowstorm. All of these issues require us to spend more time and money on maintenance and staffing, and less able to reinvest profits into winter sports. This makes it increasingly difficult for us to replace equipment, hire more groomers to groom ski trails in the winter, and have an appropriate amount of staff to handle the amount of guests wanting to come out for winter activities, which has only increased due to COVID-19 as more people are looking to spend time outside. We have adapted as best as we can with a smaller, more knowledgeable staff, increasing our prices for lodging and winter activities, seeking out other opportunities for income, such as more weddings and events in the spring and summer, and bulking up communication with guests about fire safety and the potential dangers during high winds. Many of the issues we face do not currently have solutions apart from future adaptation. Although if we continue to experience some of these problems, such as dry, inconsistent winters, more drastic measures may need to be taken. For example, taking a much greater focus off of winter activities and allocating that time and energy into other forms of income. We hope to be able to adapt to these changes accordingly, although as an outdoor recreation facility, climate change remains a harrowing factor for our business in the future. Efforts towards getting the next generation outside and making them more aware of issues around climate change, such as this with the Gear Girls, helps create a much more hopeful attitude towards a brighter future for our business.
Thank you for sharing your wonderful presentations. We are now going to open up for any questions questions and would also love to hear any suggestions and ideas you have. To get involved, take action, and help slow climate change. You can add your questions or ideas to the chat box. If your question is for anyone specific, make sure to say that in your question.
Okay, I think this is my time. I'm just going to be reading off the questions that were messaged in the chat earlier on. And by the way, my name is Raina, and I'm an intern with NAZCCA. Okay, so the first one is from Caroline, and this one I believe is for Lee Bryant. And she asked, does the NAU campus account for most of the buildings that cause the greenhouse gases?
Oh, so NAU is actually developing its own climate action and adaptation plan. It has been for several years now. And so kind of different than the city. When the city accounts for its greenhouse gases, as a municipality, it has to include all the sources of people coming in and coming out of town, all the different buildings, all the different housing units. And so we use an online program called CDP that allows us to put all of our data that our energy coordinator gathers into these databases online, and that spits out our greenhouse gas emissions. Whereas NAU, because it's a closed community as a university, it can be a little bit more targeted in looking at just the emissions that come from its buildings and the different activities that it runs. I'm not sure if they take into account students driving. I would imagine they do, but they definitely account for their buildings. And because NAU is part of the city of Flagstaff, it's sort of like incorporated into our emissions estimates, but NAU itself can be much more targeted and look at what every building on campus uses.
Okay, and I think some of the other questions have been already answered in the chat, but I think this one hasn't. This one's from Sabrina, and this is for Theo. And Sabrina asks, has the Nordic village looked at promoting and grooming more for fat biking in the winter? Often when the snow is poor for XC skis, it's good for bikes. Any talk of that?
So not necessarily grooming for fat biking, but we did open up a lot of our northern trails for fat biking this winter to try to attract more people. We're also looking into getting our own fleet of fat bikes for rentals, hopefully. If not this year, definitely next year. But we opened up probably at least 10 or 15 miles of trails for fat biking to try to attract more people out to the village.
Oh, just going. Julie asked, this is for David, are our variable and warming winters more conducive to avalanches when we don't have snowfall, or we do have snowfall, sorry?
Well, it's kind of a complicated answer to that question. I would say overall, we tend to have more and more dangerous slides on years that are big winters, big snow winters. However, avalanches are created by a combination of a cohesive slab on top of a weak layer, and the weak layers tend to develop more readily during times when you don't have snow, so the spaces between storms. So it's a more complicated question, and I'd be hesitant to say that we'll have more avalanches as a result of climate change.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so if anyone, I guess, have any more like last minute questions they want to type in real quick, and go for it. All right, this one is for Gear Girls. Can you tell us more about CCL?
So CCL is an abbreviation for Citizens Climate Lobby, and they do lots of great stuff for like climate change. And yeah, I don't really know like too much about them. I know they're a really great organization. I've done some stuff with them. So they have this calling campaign where you can call your local representatives. Yeah, and I think that's like kind of my extent of knowledge on them. But if someone else knows more, that'd be great.
Are there other opportunities in NAZCCA or the ATA for involvement?
So, McKenna, do you want to talk about the Arizona Trails Association, and then I can jump in about NAZCCA?
Yeah, so the Arizona Trail Association, so they do lots of, like, they have lots of other programs besides Gear Girls. I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head, but I can definitely put like a link to their website in the chat. So
Thank you, McKenna. And hi, everyone. I'm with Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance as well. And it's been so fun getting to host this. And thanks for asking about NAZCCA. We are always looking for volunteers. It's been, as for so many organizations, this year has been kind of challenging with COVID, but we've created a lot of climate action teams. And like one of them is about food issues, and that's one Raina has been working on, and it's kind of centered in Flagstaff, although we are operating in other areas. And we're really looking for people to join that team just to even help plan events, think of projects, even if we can't start all of them right now, but just to kind of build a team. And we're working with the city of Flagstaff on that. So we have teams on the food categories. We have a youth team that McKenna and Raina are both a part of. We have an interfaith team that's really looking to get involved with faith organizations throughout Arizona and get their opinion on climate change and find ways that their organization can, you know, work with the rest of their members to make things happen. Maybe start an environmental faith group within their church or whatever they are interested in doing. So I also put a link in the chat box. We have so many events coming up for Earth Week. We do shoe strikes in Flagstaff, which are, they kind of call it street theater, but since we can't protest in person, we do demonstrations like that. And like this month, they're targeting media. So there's a March media campaign, but definitely check out our website. There is a lot on there, and reach out to me anytime if you have questions.
All right, we have one more question that came in. Are there any other ideas from folks listening to this webinar of ways you all try to reduce your own greenhouse emissions?
Feel free to throw ideas in the chat box, all you guys out there listening. We appreciate you being here tonight. They're rolling in. So Raina, I think if that's it, I'll go ahead and share this last slide. And thank you guys all for being here.
We've had so much help in putting together this webinar. I want to thank Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance, the Arizona Trail Association, the Arizona Nordic Village, Kachina Peaks Avalanche Center, the City of Flagstaff, Dara, Marks Marino, and Julie Polovich for all of their amazing help with putting together this webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, Gear Girls. It was such a pleasure working with you all. I'm so proud to be a part of this, and keep up the amazing work. You guys are awesome. So have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Gear Girls. Thank you, Gear Girls.
Bye.
Goodbye.
All right, thank you.